At 7:18 p.m. on October 3, 2016, traffic on Interstate 90 rolled past a small gas station outside Missoula, Montana. In that parking lot, a red touring motorcycle fueled up for the last confirmed time. Its rider was 28-year-old Lauren Mercer, halfway through a solo ride she had planned for months. By 8 p.m., she was due to call her parents in Ohio. It was part of a strict daily check-in rule she had never once broken. The call never came. 6 years later, a development hundreds of miles away will force investigators to admit they had been searching in the wrong state. Tonight we ask one question: what really happened to Lauren Mercer? Lauren's disappearance did not begin with a dramatic crash or a frantic 911 call. It began with silence, and with a pattern that suddenly stopped. For nearly 3 weeks, her routine had been simple and precise. Every evening she sent a picture, a town name, or a brief text saying she was in for the night. Every morning, her parents checked weather along her planned route. They marked her progress on a paper map spread across their kitchen table. It was a watch system they all agreed on before she left. It balanced her independence with their need for basic reassurance. As long as the messages came, no one panicked. The distance between Missoula and her planned stop that night was under 150 miles. For her, that counted as an easy ride. On October 3rd, that reassurance evaporated. Phone records would later show no outgoing calls from Lauren's number after late afternoon. Her last confirmed purchase appeared as a modest charge at that gas station west of Missoula. Surveillance cameras captured her paying inside and stepping back out. She tightened the chin strap on her helmet and rode away toward the darkening highway. The clerk saw nothing unusual. No one reported any wrecked bike in the ditch, no debris, no skid marks. By midnight in Ohio, her parents had called so many times that her recorded greeting felt like an insult. By sunrise, they were past worry and into something colder. They were sure something terrible had happened in that missing stretch. Lauren Mercer grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a household that valued routine and clear communication. Her parents, Daniel and Ruth Mercer, both worked steady jobs and kept detailed schedules. Lauren carried those habits into adulthood. Friends described her as organized, calm, and careful about her movements. She planned her solo motorcycle trip with spreadsheets, printed route notes, and a shared calendar her parents could view from home. Every stop had a timestamp. Every lodging option had backup choices in case something changed. Her parents trusted her judgment, but they worried about the long distances and late hours. To ease those concerns, Lauren agreed to a nightly check-in. It was not optional for her family, and she treated it as part of the routine. In the weeks before she left, Lauren upgraded her riding gear and installed GPS tracking on her motorcycle. She also added a handlebar mount for her phone. She scheduled maintenance on the bike and replaced the rear tire on September 20th, 2016, only 13 days before the night she disappeared. A coworker later told detectives that Lauren also mentioned a small concern. She said a man had followed her for several miles during a short test ride near Englewood. She had brushed it off as someone curious about her bike, but the remark stood out when investigators reviewed her final weeks. Despite the occasional worry, Lauren was excited about the trip. She had saved for months and requested her vacation days half a year in advance. She organized her luggage into labeled compression bags and kept a digital copy of her identification in cloud storage. She shared her blood type and medical information with her parents in case of an emergency. None of these steps hinted at fear. They reflected the way she handled every major event, with structure and preparation. In the early days of her trip, Lauren sent short videos to her parents. She filmed rest areas, mile markers, and brief clips of the road ahead. She kept her narration simple. She preferred facts to impressions. On several clips, her GPS unit showed precise coordinates. Detectives reviewed these details later and found no sign of unusual movement. Everything seemed consistent until the night her phone fell silent. Her careful planning made the gap on October 3rd harder to explain. It also raised questions investigators were not ready to answer. By 8:30 p.m. on October 3rd, 2016, the Mercers' two-story house in Dayton was supposed to be quiet and predictable. Lauren's nightly call usually came between 7:45 and 8:15, often right after she checked into a motel. That night, the home phone sat on the kitchen counter, screen dark. At 8:20, Ruth sent a short text asking for a quick update and a town name. The message showed as delivered but never drew a reply. At 8:46, Daniel tried calling Lauren's cell. It rang 4 times, then rolled to voicemail. He left a brief message, trying not to sound alarmed. The next 50 minutes changed everything. At 9:37 p.m., Lauren's number called the house once. The ring lasted less than 2 seconds before the line cut off. Phone records would later confirm the call, but there was no voicemail, no second attempt. For her parents, that half-started call made things worse. It suggested someone had the phone in their hand and ended the call before speaking. Within an hour, Daniel called again. This time the call went straight to voicemail. That pattern never changed after that point. At 11 p.m., they opened the shared trip calendar and checked her planned route for the day. Missoula to a budget motel outside Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, roughly 140 miles. Even with gas and a dinner stop, she should have arrived long before dark. Ruth refreshed the weather reports, looking for storms or sudden road closures. The conditions along Interstate 90 were clear. There were no major accidents reported in local news alerts. The situation did not fit a simple breakdown or delay. Just after midnight in Ohio, Daniel called the motel listed for that night. The clerk checked the reservation log and the live occupancy list. There was no one checked in under Lauren's name and no motorcycle in the lot matching her description. When the clerk mentioned that State Patrol usually notified them about serious wrecks on that stretch of highway, the room fell silent. By sunrise, the Mercers stopped telling each other that there had to be a harmless explanation. They agreed on one hard fact before they dialed Montana authorities to report her missing. Whatever had happened to Lauren on that short run west of Missoula was far beyond a late-night delay. Detective Mark Halverson of the Montana Highway Patrol took the missing person report on the afternoon of October 4, 2016. By that point, Lauren had been out of contact for almost 20 hours. The first step was verification. He contacted the motel outside Coeur d'Alene and confirmed she had never checked in. He then requested Lauren's phone and bank records through emergency disclosure procedures, citing immediate safety concerns. Within hours, data began to fill in the gaps of her last known movements. Bank transactions showed a clear pattern during the first weeks of her trip. Small fuel charges, low-cost meals, predictable amounts. The final confirmed purchase was a $32 fuel and snack charge at a truck stop on U.S. Highway 93, just west of Missoula, at 7:12 p.m. local time on October 3rd. After that, there were no withdrawals, no room charges, no attempts at cash back. It was as if the card had vanished with her. Phone records added another layer. Lauren's last outgoing text left the network at 7:24 p.m., a short message to a friend in Dayton about road construction. At 7:31 p.m., her phone connected briefly to a tower near Frenchtown, Montana. That single ping placed her moving northwest along Interstate 90. There were no further connections after 7:31 p.m., not even failed call attempts to her parents. Investigators found that detail strange. Even in areas with poor reception, phones often leave a trail of partial signals. Lauren's simply stopped. The GPS tracker Lauren had installed on her motorcycle should have given precise coordinates. Instead, it produced one of the most disturbing findings in the case. The subscription service for detailed logging had been canceled online at 6:02 p.m. on October 3rd, 1 hour before her final fuel stop. The account password had not been shared with her parents. The company could not determine whether Lauren herself canceled the plan or whether someone else knew her credentials. There was no sign of unauthorized access from a foreign location. It appeared to be a domestic login, somewhere in the western United States, with no exact city recorded. With no wreckage reported and no obvious digital trail after that last tower ping, investigators faced a basic but unsettling question. On October 6, 2016, 3 days after Lauren's last contact, Halverson and a local deputy visited the truck stop where her final card charge appeared. The assistant manager pulled transaction logs and then unlocked the small office that housed the security system. Cameras covered the fuel lanes, the main doors, and most of the parking lot. One camera, mounted above the entrance, had a clear view of pump number 6, the pump linked to Lauren's receipt. The video from 7:05 to 7:20 p.m. showed Lauren clearly. She fueled the red touring motorcycle, walked inside with her helmet under one arm, paid at the counter, and then stepped back out. Nothing about her movements suggested confusion or distress. She checked her phone once while standing near the door and then slipped it into her jacket pocket. As she walked toward the bike, a gray pickup pulled into the lane behind her. A tall man in a dark ball cap left the driver's seat and approached her from the left side. The camera had no audio, but his gestures were obvious. He pointed at her motorcycle, then at the interstate, then back at her. Lauren did not seem eager to engage. She kept one hand on the bars and answered briefly. After less than a minute, she put on her helmet, shook her head, and mounted the bike. The man took a half step closer as if to say something else, then backed off. She pulled away from the pump at 7:17 p.m. The gray pickup waited 10 seconds and then followed out of the lot, turning in the same direction. Halverson froze the frame and printed still images of the man and the truck. Within a day, a highway officer in Idaho recognized the vehicle. It belonged to a 42-year-old contractor from Post Falls who often worked night jobs along the interstate. When questioned, he admitted speaking to Lauren. He said he warned her about elk crossing the road after dark and asked where she was headed. His timesheets, GPS data from his work truck, and toll records from Washington state placed him miles away by the time her phone went silent. The first real suspect in Lauren's disappearance had an airtight alibi. In the second week of the investigation, the focus shifted from data to pavement. Montana Highway Patrol, Missoula County deputies, and volunteer search teams were assigned a defined corridor. They divided Interstate 90 into segments between the truck stop on US 93 and the Idaho state line. Every exit, rest area, and pullout along that stretch was logged. Troopers drove slowly with hazard lights on, checking guardrails, drainage ditches, and steep embankments for any sign of a crash. They found discarded tires, broken plastic from older wrecks, and pieces of blown truck retread. None of it matched Lauren's motorcycle. The Department of Transportation supplied footage from roadside traffic cameras. One camera near mile marker 77 captured a red motorcycle with a rider in a dark jacket at 7:39 p.m. The timestamp and direction matched Lauren's planned route. The next camera, at mile marker 86, never recorded her passing. Dozens of other vehicles in that time window appeared on both cameras. Only her bike failed to show up in the second frame. Investigators now had a smaller window, a 9-mile section of highway where something had interrupted her trip. Search teams walked that 9-mile section on foot. They scrambled down slopes beneath overpasses and inspected areas thick with brush. On October 9th, a deputy reported a helmet lying near a game trail about half a mile from the roadway. For several hours, investigators believed they had found Lauren's gear. The helmet was the wrong brand and size. It belonged to a local hunter who had lost it the previous season. The momentary surge of hope collapsed back into the same problem. There was still no physical trace of her motorcycle leaving the asphalt. Officers also checked nearby hospitals and urgent care clinics for unidentified patients. None had admitted a woman matching Lauren's description. No tow company reported hauling a red touring bike from that corridor. No property owner reported an abandoned motorcycle on private land. In a case like this, investigators usually expect something simple first. A skid mark, a broken reflector, a fresh scar in the dirt. Here, the highway and the landscape around it looked unchanged. The question became how a full-sized motorcycle and its rider could vanish from a 9-mile stretch of busy interstate without leaving a single clear mark. By late October 2016, the official search along Interstate 90 had shifted into a slower phase. Patrol units still watched for any sign of Lauren's red motorcycle, but the grid searches and daily briefings stopped. Daniel and Ruth were not ready to accept that pace. They flew to Missoula, rented a compact car, and drove the same highway where her last camera image had placed her. They taped missing posters at gas stations, diners, and rest areas from Frenchtown to the Idaho line. Truckers, night shift workers, and other riders took stacks of flyers to pass along. Many had never heard of the case until then. Back in Ohio, Lauren's friends built a website and a public page dedicated to her disappearance. They uploaded still frames from the truck stop video and the highway camera image near mile marker 77. The site listed the exact time stamps and locations from her last confirmed sightings. Within weeks, the case reached motorcycle forums and true crime discussion boards. Users with no connection to Lauren began to dissect the available information line by line. On one popular forum, members recreated her route using open map tools and state transport data. They plotted the distance between the two highway cameras and compared it to her typical cruising speed. Several users with law enforcement backgrounds explained how narrow the 9-mile window really was. Others focused on the gray pickup and the man in the ball cap, even after news spread that he had been cleared by investigators. A few posters accused authorities of accepting his alibi too quickly, despite the documented toll records and GPS logs. As the public records process moved forward, redacted copies of early reports and warrants began to circulate online. Someone noticed a detail that had not received much attention at first. The cancellation of Lauren's GPS tracking subscription at 6:02 p.m. showed up in an internal summary. A user claiming IT experience pointed out that the login log lacked a precise city, listing only a broad region in the western United States. That gap fed new theories about who could have accessed her account. The more strangers studied the fragments of Lauren's last day, the more one problem stood out. By early 2019, more than 2 years had passed since Lauren Mercer disappeared on that 9-mile stretch of Interstate 90. The case file in Montana was thick with reports and search logs, but thin on answers. Officially, investigators still treated the disappearance as a missing person case with suspicious elements. Unofficially, some officers admitted they were split between two competing explanations. One group believed Lauren had been the target of a crime. Another group wondered if she had chosen to vanish on her own. The voluntary disappearance theory frustrated Daniel and Ruth. Detectives noted that Lauren was an adult with no criminal history, no known enemies, and no record of serious mental illness. She did not leave a note or withdraw large amounts of cash. Still, some pointed to the canceled GPS subscription and a few vague comments she had made at work about wanting a break from routine life. To a small number of officers, those details opened a possible door to a planned departure. The alternative remained darker. Advocates for a criminal theory pointed to the phone records and traffic camera footage. They stressed that Lauren's digital trail stopped abruptly between two fixed points, with no sign of voluntary movement afterward. They also raised the issue of her personality. People who knew her well described her as structured and loyal. Quiet conflicts with family or work did not fit the pattern of a person ready to discard their entire identity. In March 2019, a call came in through a national missing persons hotline. A couple passing through Yakima, Washington, reported a waitress at a highway diner who looked, in their words, almost exactly like the photo of Lauren from the missing poster. The tip reached Montana within hours. For Daniel and Ruth, it was the first concrete possibility in years that their daughter might still be alive. Local deputies interviewed the waitress the same week. Her name and date of birth did not match Lauren's. She provided childhood medical records and school photos to confirm her identity. She had never been to Ohio and had no connection to Lauren's circle. The lead ended with a brief report and a closed folder, but it left something behind that was harder to file away. Almost 6 years after Lauren Mercer vanished, the case broke open far from Montana. In late May 2022, southern Idaho saw an unusually heavy runoff season. Warm temperatures and rapid snowmelt pushed the Snake River to levels that local officials had not seen in decades. Near Twin Falls, the current under the Perrine Bridge grew faster and more violent, tearing at old debris lodged along the canyon walls. A week after the water began to recede, a group of recreational divers entered the river to survey the changes. One of them, a former rescue diver named Evan Blake, noticed something that did not belong. Wedged against a rock outcrop about a quarter-mile downstream from the bridge, Blake saw a curved piece of metal coated in silt. At first, he thought it was part of an old guardrail. As he moved closer, the shape resolved into a partial wheel and front fender. The red paint was dull and scratched, but still visible beneath the river grime. The object was not a loose fragment. It was the upper portion of a motorcycle frame, almost fully buried in packed sediment. Blake surfaced, marked the spot on his handheld GPS, and notified the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Office. The Idaho State Police dive team responded the same week. Recovering the motorcycle required multiple dives and the use of lift bags. When the frame finally broke free, it rose from the water as a single, mud-covered mass. On the riverbank, technicians began to clean key areas, starting with the steering head. The stamped vehicle identification number stood out once the grime was cleared. Dispatch ran the VIN through national databases. Within minutes, The result came back with a hit. The motorcycle had been reported missing in connection with an open missing person case from Montana. Registered owner, Lauren Mercer of Dayton, Ohio. Date of report, October 4, 2016. The file carried a caution flag indicating possible foul play. For Idaho investigators who had never heard her name before that afternoon, the implications were immediate. For Montana authorities, the notification that arrived by secure email that evening did something else. It suggested that for almost 6 years, they had been looking for answers in the wrong state. The red motorcycle was transported under guard to an Idaho State Police facility in Meridian. Investigators treated it as a fresh crime scene, even though the VIN linked it to a 6-year-old file. Technicians documented every angle before the first layer of river silt was removed. The goal was simple. They needed to know how long the bike had been in the Snake River and how it got there. A forensic materials specialist examined the frame, wheels, and exposed metal surfaces. Corrosion was present, but not as advanced as officers expected. Brake rotors showed surface rust only. Bolts and untreated parts lacked the deep pitting seen on vehicles submerged for many years. Biological growth on the engine casings and exhaust also appeared limited. Lab notes estimated continuous submersion at somewhere between 8 and 14 months. That conclusion ruled out one central assumption. The motorcycle had not been lying under the Perrine Bridge since October 2016. A separate reconstruction expert focused on structural damage. He found no long scrape patterns consistent with a slide along asphalt or gravel. The front forks were forced upward, and both wheels were deformed in a way consistent with a vertical impact. Internal engine mounts showed stress fractures aligned in one direction. The report stated that the damage matched a high fall into water rather than a roadside crash or low-speed drop. Investigators measured the distance from the bridge deck to the average river level. The height was just over 480 feet. During a detailed inspection of the intake system, a technician opened the airbox beneath the fuel tank. Inside, behind the filter, he found a folded scrap of coated paper that had remained mostly dry. It was a torn portion of a printed road atlas page. The fragment showed a section of southeastern Washington and western Idaho. One small town north of Lewiston had been circled in blue ink. The pencil-thin circle was faint but visible. With that one piece of paper and the lab findings, the case could no longer be treated as a simple disappearance. It now pointed to someone who had kept Lauren's motorcycle for years, then made a deliberate trip to the Perrine Bridge to erase a problem. The discovery of Lauren Mercer's motorcycle forced agencies in 2 states to reopen a file many had quietly set aside. Idaho State Police assigned Detective Carla Ruiz as lead on their side. Montana brought back Mark Halverson in a consulting role. The first step was to accept what the lab reports meant. Lauren's bike had been kept somewhere dry for almost 5 years after she vanished, then moved to the Snake River between late 2020 and early 2022. That timeline made a random accident almost impossible. Ruiz requested Lauren's full medical and employment records, hoping for any detail that might help in a future identification. She also ordered a focused review of missing person reports along the corridor between western Montana and southeastern Washington during the same period. The torn map fragment from the airbox pointed to a small farming town north of Lewiston called Asotin, just across the river in Washington. The circle around it was faint, but it was the only marked point on the scrap. In July 2022, a joint task force conducted a 3-week search of rural areas around Asotin and along lesser-used county roads. They checked abandoned outbuildings, steep pullouts, and gravel turnoffs that could serve as discreet meeting spots. Deputies interviewed landowners, mechanics, and tow operators, asking about any red touring motorcycle seen in the last 6 years. No one reported storing or scrapping such a bike. The task force ended without a single clear lead on where the motorcycle had been kept before it was dumped. 2 months later, in September 2022, a hiker walking a narrow trail along the Snake River south of Lewiston noticed something pale protruding from a recent slide of loose soil. He contacted local authorities. Deputies recovered several partial human remains from the slope and the immediate riverbank. The bones were transported to the Washington State Forensic Laboratory in Seattle for analysis. A forensic anthropologist determined that they belonged to an adult woman between 25 and 35 years old, consistent with Lauren's age at disappearance. One clavicle showed evidence of a fully healed fracture with a distinctive shape. When compared with Lauren's old hospital records from a bicycle crash at age 19, the match was striking. Combined with dental records and circumstantial factors, examiners reached a conclusion. The remains almost certainly belonged to Lauren Mercer, and the manner of death was classified as homicide with undetermined cause. One crucial question still had no answer. Who kept Lauren's motorcycle hidden for almost 5 years? By the end of 2022, the official language around Lauren Mercer's file had changed. She was no longer listed as a missing person from Montana. She was listed as a homicide victim whose remains were recovered along the Snake River in Washington. The jurisdiction chart on the front of the case binder now included 3 states: Montana for the disappearance, Idaho for the recovered motorcycle, Washington for the human remains. The paperwork looked more complete. The investigation itself did not. Daniel and Ruth traveled to Washington State in November 2022 for a private meeting with investigators and the medical examiner's office. They were shown the formal identification report, the comparison images of the clavicle fracture, and the conclusion that the remains almost certainly belonged to their daughter. They were also told what the report could not provide. There was no clear evidence of shooting, stabbing, or strangulation. The official manner of death was homicide with an undetermined mechanism. For the Mercers, that single word mattered. It confirmed what they had believed since October 2016. Someone had taken Lauren's life. Publicly, the 3 agencies presented a careful joint message. They announced the identification, restated the known timeline, and confirmed that Lauren's motorcycle had been kept somewhere for years before being dumped off the Perrine Bridge. They did not name any suspects. They did not share the full details of the map fragment or the GPS subscription cancellation. They emphasized that the case remained active and asked for information from anyone who had seen a red touring motorcycle stored or sold under unusual circumstances after the fall of 2016. Online communities that had followed the case for years reacted in predictable ways. Some users argued that the key lay in the Asotin area, and that someone there had crossed paths with Lauren in the days after she was last seen in Montana. Others fixated on the canceled GPS plan and suggested that whoever accessed her account might already be in an unrelated database. A smaller group held on to the idea that Lauren had met someone she trusted enough to leave the interstate corridor voluntarily, at least at first. On paper, the Mercer case is now an unsolved interstate homicide with scattered remains and a deliberately discarded motorcycle. In reality, it is still a gap of 9 miles on a highway and a decision made by someone who has not yet been named.